Hi, this is Dr. Butch Rosser, and welcome back to Heartburn University. And now we're going to Chapter 5, Complications of GERD. Well, we've been talking about the causes, the in and out of the heartburn, but what can this do? And this is what we want to talk about. When you have a condition that happens continuously, when the body functions are impacted, this is called a complication. And we're going to talk about how the body can be negatively impacted by gastroesophageal reflux disease, especially if it's not treated for a long period of time. So let's go down the list of the complications that can happen from gastroesophageal reflux disease. Well, first, you can have what we call erosive esophagitis. Remember, I was telling you that the bad thing that happens when this food and acid comes back into the food tube out of the stomach is that it can actually hurt and eat through the lining of that food tube. Now, superficially, it's called esophagitis. You get a little slight inflammation. But if it goes on for a much longer period of time, it can actually develop into an ulcer, and that's an actual crater. Now, if it goes on an even longer period of time, the body heals by scarring, and when it tries to heal by scarring in the esophagus, you can have what we call a stricture. Next, you can have that acid coming all the way back up into your throat and actually going into your lungs and having what we call aspiration pneumonia. That's right, you can get pneumonia from GERD. If you let that damage occur for a long period of time, a small number of people will get what we call Barrett's esophagus, and that's where the lining of the food tube actually tries to become similar to the lining of the stomach to help fight or resist the acid. And once that happens, those cells become unstable. Now, the last thing that can happen is esophageal cancer, and it can come from Barrett's esophagus. And these are some of the very concerning complications that we have with very severe gastroesophageal reflux disease. Now what I want to do is kind of give you a visual look. And I can once again do my John Madden Telestrator bit to be able to show you what some of these complications look like. So let's look at this particular picture. There is the food tube. Here's the stomach. There's the lower esophageal sphincter right there. Okay? So as this food and liquid comes back up, you can see it's causing this redness and superficial, what we call denusions or stripping of the esophageal lining. The acid is actually eating through this lining. And you see these red streaks, and we have different categories of these streaks. Here's another better look right here, and you can see these streaks coming all the way up. And we categorize these as A, B, C, and D, depending upon how deep this erosion is. And that's what we call erosive esophagitis. Now, you have to remember this word because remember, when you go out and fill your other questionnaire for a second opinion, a chaperone, so we can help you figure out with your working with your doctor, the treatment and disease and diagnosis, this is very important to remember this word. Now, let's go and show you what happens when this is allowed to go on much longer. Now here, what you see is an ulcer. See, it's developing a deeper erosion into that area. And once it gets there, you actually have an ulcer. Yes, you can have an ulcer inside your food tube or your esophagus. Now, I want to use this picture we used earlier to show you what happens with a stricture. We talked about esophagitis, right? And we talked about erosions and ulcers, right? What happens when this begins chronic and long term? And this is what happens. You start healing with scar, and scar builds up, and builds up this area till what? Food tries to go down, and it can't go down and bounces back up. You don't have this big, wide passageway anymore. You actually have a blockage of this passageway from scar tissue, and that's called an esophageal stricture. Now, let's look at Barrett's esophagus. Now, look at this nice, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's just my working with the technology. But right here, I want you to see this nice pale pink color. Then I want you to notice this hot pink color over here. Now, this is normal lining. This is Barrett's esophagus. And you actually diagnose that by having an endoscope, and you can see the scope coming down to be able to look at this area and inside the stomach. But Barrett's esophagus is very important because it, on a small percentage of the time, can actually go on to progress to esophageal cancer. Now, to let you know exactly what's going on with Barrett's, the cells or the lining of the food tube, they don't have protection against acid. The stomach does. So over time, the body tries to change the cells in the food tube to the same kind of cells that are in the stomach. And the thing is, they are not always quite as successful, and the cells are not as stable, and that instability can cause the cells to actually transform into cancer cells. And as I said before, all of this goes about because the body wants to protect itself, because the stomach cells can protect you from acid. And as I mentioned before, unfortunately, it does not do the same job. Now, the other complication that can come from Barrett's, and you can see the Barrett's esophagus here. Here's the normal. Here's the Barrett's. You can develop what we see here. I mean, this, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or an MD to know that this is something very bad. And this is what esophageal cancer looks like. It actually also has a stricture. That means the stricture actually means you decrease the size of the opening for the tube to go through. And this is when you start having a problem with swallowings and so forth. Now, I want you to understand that we do not want your heartburn to get to any of these stages. And that's why it's so important for you to be properly diagnosed, and you go to your doctor to work with your doctor to do the right thing, as well as lifestyle stages and other things that can help you win your war against heartburn. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the cancer situation. And I want you to know that there's two types of cancer. The first one is squamous cell. Now, this begins in the cells that line the esophagus. The other one is called adenocarcinoma, and it's found in the lower third of the esophagus. And these are the type of cancers, and depending on what the cancer actually is, will depend on the treatment. Now, unfortunately, as we mentioned before, esophageal cancer is the what? Fastest growing cancer in America, up over 600% since 1972. Well, I just want to say thank you so much. This is Dr. Butch Rosser. Really appreciating you being at Heartburn University, and stay tuned for our next chapter as you are empowered to win your war against heartburn.